Here we go. Hello, welcome, Nancy. It's so lovely to see you again. And welcome to our audience, to Ken and to Gavin. I generally share my screen at this stage and I go over a couple of our general points. I don't need to go over them right now because we know what we're doing. But what I would like to do is cut short this. Excuse me a moment while I just find my feet here. Come on, yeah. Nancy, you know who you are, and we know who you are now because we called you back twice. So we're thrilled to have you amongst us. Thank you very much. And I generally go over the format which we've been through already, Nancy. But I thought I would like to come to the quote for tonight. I always choose a quote that I think matches the person. And our quote tonight is play is the answer on how anything comes about. And you would have read a lot of Jean Piaget in your studies and your research anyway, but I thought that was actually quite an interesting quote just for you, Nancy, just for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Celeste.
We've got people coming up, which I'm not going to take time off now. I prefer to spend the time with you. So if I can hand over to you, please, Nancy,
okay.
If you'd like to take it away.
Okay, great. Well, it is really an honor to be back with this group again. We last spoke, I think it was in November of last year, and I did a presentation on a marketing mindset for inventors and really helped put inventors into the space where they can empathize with what their customer wants, what the consumer wants, and then feed into that. And coming out of that session, it seemed like there was more things to talk about. And so we arranged to have this follow-up presentation, and I'm going to be focusing on two different topics today. The first topic is collaborative invention, and the second topic is deal making. Before we get started, I just want to confirm and acknowledge that this presentation is based on my personal experience. My personal experience is US based, although I've done global deals, and it's been in the toy industry. And so some inventors on this Zoom might have inventions that aren't toy related. And so I just encourage you to take what you want and leave the rest. There might be some different dynamics at play, different rules of thumb, et cetera, depending on the industry that you're seeking to break into with your invention. So with that as an introduction, let me just say one last thing is that I have been in the toy industry for 30 plus years. About 14 years of that was spent in the corporate world working for two major companies, Mattel Toys and then Spin Master, makers of Paw Patrol. And then I've spent 16 years in my own company in between those two corporate gigs. And in my own company, I did consulting with over 200 companies, but I also did invention. And so I've seen invention from both sides of the table. The ones buying the inventions or licensing the inventions and the ones pitching and selling the inventions. So this is really drawn from that experience, okay? Okay, let me just see here. Okay, so, whoops. Okay, so real quickly, what we talked about last time was selling your invention, and we talked about some key points, and I thought it might be helpful just to kind of put this list up. We talked about each of these in depth. I believe you recorded that session, Celeste, did you?
We did, Nancy. I also wrote it up. So just out of interest sake, I would like to send you our newsletter again. It was a very good write-up that covered all of these points well. So okay, that was really very lovely. Yeah.
Okay, so I just thought that would be helpful. So now I want to talk about collaborative invention. And my model, my mindset for this was share the work, share the risk, share the reward. Okay. So this idea of collaborative invention is really grounded in the fact that a piece of something smaller, a smaller piece of something is much better than zero of a big thing, right? And we all have our strengths. So part of what inspired me to pursue collaborative invention is that I am a marketer, I'm a brand builder, and my ideas in the toy space were driven by consumer needs and trends, and I would come up with ideas of what I thought would be marketable to consumers. But I'm not a designer, I'm not an engineer, my prototyping skills are zero. So I was either going to have to pay a lot of money to get professional help in order to be in a position of being able to put an invention in front of a company. And this became my alternative approach that was lower risk for me because I didn't have to have a lot of out-of-pocket expenses before I ever got a deal. So I would bring together people to help me. And depending on what the idea was, I would handpick people that I knew that could fill gaps that I had in my ability to put a prototype on the table in front of a company. So I hired designers and I hired engineers, in some cases, model makers. And when I say hired, I should say I partnered with them. I developed a boilerplate contract that I had everyone who participated sign, where we laid out the parameters of the agreement in very clear fashion. You can't see some of the words on the screen right now, but I'm going to be posting about this talk tomorrow on my LinkedIn profile, Nancy Zwiers. And if you follow me on LinkedIn and comment on my post, I'll give you my email just a little bit later. You can email me and I will send you that boilerplate contract for your use. You can make adjustments to it any way you want, but it will give you a good starting point for how you can enlist people and have an agreement in writing to govern the parameters of the relationship. I have found the importance of written contracts to be absolutely paramount. I've been surprised when early in my entrepreneurial career, I was amazed at how people can rewrite history to serve their own mindset of what they think happened and what they think was agreed to. And the only way to give an objective stake in the ground on what the agreement is to commit it to paper and have two people sign it. And that way you all know what you've agreed to and there's no room for interpretation. Okay, so that's what this contract is designed to do. Okay, so here's my email address, and feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, comment on the post tomorrow, send me an email, and you'll get that boilerplate contract. Okay, all right, let's move on. So I want to talk a little bit about, but before I go here, I want to talk a little bit about the Polly Pocket story. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Polly Pocket. It's a girl's toy, and it was originally launched in the early 90s. And I took over the brand in 1997 after it had peaked and was on its way down, and many people gave it up for dead. And we were looking for ways to reinvent it. we already were licensing Polly Pocket from another company. And that company licensed it from an inventor. So there were already 3 people involved in the business. When we were looking to relaunch it, we had a presentation of an invention by a major toy inventing firm, BMT, Big Monster Toys. It used to also stand for 3 people's last names. And they pitched to us a model of a prototype of craton clothing for a small doll that just the outfits easily slipped on and off. And it was really easy to dress this small scale doll. And we loved it. And we thought this could be a great foundation to relaunch Polly Pocket on. But then we found out that another company, Genie Products, had a patent on craton clothing. So we were already paying a royalty for Polly Pocket. We loved the Big Monster toy model that they showed with us, and we wouldn't have thought of it if they hadn't shown it to us. And Genie Products has a patent. So what we ended up doing, it was a 3-way shared royalty. So instead of a typical 5% royalty that you would expect if you were the sole licensor of an invention, they all had to take what we call a big haircut. So Mattel ended up paying 6% instead of 5%, and it was split 3 ways. The inventor of Polly Pocket, the patent holder of the craton clothing, and the inventing firm that originally presented the concept to us. It was a 3-way shared royalty. People weren't thrilled about having to share that royalty with others. They weren't thrilled about it because they thought they were going to be giving up too much. But this was the only way forward. There was no other way forward for us. And so everyone ultimately agreed to this 3-way split, getting 2% instead of 5%. Long story short, Polly Pocket was relaunched in 1999. As of 2014, it had achieved $1.5 billion in revenue globally. And so 2% of $1.5 billion is a lot of money. And the reason why BMT was no longer the names of 3 inventors, but it was changed to Big Monster Toys, is because those 3 inventors retired with a lot of money and a beautiful lifestyle. So I tell this story as a way to illustrate a smaller percent of something is better than a huge percent of nothing. And we all know that we are good in certain things, but not good in everything, or that we have some good ideas, but we don't have a lock on all the good ideas. So my goal here today is to encourage you to open your mind to what's possible when you partner. What's possible when you partner, okay? Okay, so before I get into this, let me just also say the collaborative invention that I personally led, I did it over the course of 4 years, from 2008 to 2012. And I had many different teams. Each of my projects had a team. And there was usually about 3 or 4 people on a team, a collaborative invention team. And at the outset, I always, Philosophy, my company, always took 30%. Okay, I wasn't taking 100%, I was taking 30%. It was my idea, but I knew I needed help to bring it to fruition. And so then I would, for 2, 3, 4, sometimes 4 people, we would split the balance of the 70% in a way that we thought was fair and in a way that people could agree with. Over the course of that 4 years, we had a very strong success out of the gate. We had a huge deal with Mattel. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about contracts. But suffice it to say, it was an advance well into the 6 figures. I'm not at liberty to tell you the amount, but it was well into the 6 figures. It was the biggest deal that Mattel had done in recent years in terms of the size of the advance, what they were willing to put up in order to have the privilege of developing this idea and launching it. Part of the reason why it was such a big deal is that many inventors in the toy space license cool features. This is a cool feature. It does blah, 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 this, and you can put it on this brand, or you could put it on this brand. What we did was we created brands. I'm a marketer. I'm a brand builder. So my personal strength was to envision what a new brand could be. And so when you are licensing a brand versus a feature, you get royalties on all the sales of the brand, even if they're developing new features and things like that. It's kind of like what I talked about Polly Pocket. Polly Pocket was originally one thing, but then because they licensed the brand, when it morphed into many different things, the original inventor with the original concept got a royalty on all of it. Okay. And so you might think about, if you're not a marketing or branding person, you might think about taking your invention and partnering with a branding expert, and elevating your cool idea, your cool invention into a brand that has the capability of creating a much longer, larger revenue stream in royalties for you. Okay, so I wanted to make that point, and I'll be revisiting that the Mattel story a little bit later in this presentation. Some other things. So we did that. Then we had another brand, and we were able to license that to Mattel as well. Mattel was kind of considered the gold standard of licensees. So we, right out of the gate, we had 2 6-figure advance deals with the biggest manufacturer in the toy industry. We were on fire. Later, we licensed an invention to another company that was in the activity space, and that went to market. We licensed a doll line to Bandai. That went to market. We licensed a doll line to Razor scooter company. They actually, launched a doll. So we had some real success. We also, in the course of doing our work, we also, I lost my train of thought. So all these things that we placed, the other one was Spin Master. We had a line that we launched, that we licensed to Spin Master. So we had 5 or 6 deals in the course of 4 years. And Leapfrog, I forgot Leapfrog. We licensed something to Leapfrog too. All told, my little 30% share of these inventions, helped me, redo my backyard. I made over $1 million in revenue, licensing revenue, from all these different inventions. And because I had so many partners, I could do lots of stuff. I wasn't just consumed with one. I could do what I was best at multiple times and then share with my partners. So that's the beauty of collaborative invention. What's the possibility for you in partnership? Okay, so I talked about the importance of defining the relationship on paper, and now I want to move on to the next part of my talk. And I say, speaking of contracts, and I'm a very trusting person. I'm very trusting and I'm very trustworthy, but I am a huge believer in contracts are essential. Contracts are essential. So first of all, I want to say no deal. There is no deal. No handshake agreements count. There's no deal until the long form contract is signed. Okay, so I work with an inventing company as one of my coaching clients, and they have really exciting conversations, and they start living into the future of what this is going to be. And it falls out of bed at some point, and they don't have the future they envisioned. So exercise restraint on your excitement until you get that deal signed. Many things start and then don't go to fruition. And I'll talk more about that. So let's just talk about this process a little bit. The first deal that you might enter into is an option agreement. An option agreement means that the company that you're pitching it to, and they like it and they want some time to evaluate it, they'll pay you an option fee to, quote, take it off the table and not show anybody else. And usually it's in the toy space in the US, it's $5,000 for a 60-day review period. So I take it off the table for 60 days and I get $5,000 for doing it. A lot of inventors who are so anxious to please their prospective licensee, that licensee goes, we love this. We really love this. We want to, take it back and take it in and a lot of times people will let them take it without an option. And then 60 days later, they get it back and said, yeah, we reviewed it, and it wasn't right for us. And so as an inventor, I didn't get anything done in 60 days. I was at a standstill. So you really need to stand strong and insist that you will be continuing to present this to other people unless you get an option. So the next step, let's just say, the company says, yep, we want to do this. Let's start, hammering out our deal terms. So usually there's a very clear one-page piece of paper called a deal term sheet or a term sheet. It's usually non-binding, but it's easier to negotiate the key elements of the contract if you don't have all this legalese wording and all this stuff. It's just what you need to know that you're on the same page, you're in the same ballpark, and it makes sense to get the long form in the works, which involves more attorney time on both sides. So the most important thing is, what is the IP, the intellectual property that's being licensed, defining that. I'm going to come back to this point because this represented a big surprise for me down the road on one of my deals. But basically, you're licensing the feature, or you're licensing the brand concept, or what have you. Then there's a deal term, the term of the license. And oftentimes it would be a 2 to 3 year term. And then there would be some language related to, the conditions under which that license could be renewed. There's also language sometimes about what constitutes an expansion off the original idea that is also subject to a royalty. Kind of like what I talked about, like if it's a brand, or maybe they use this feature in this brand and that's where you originally license it, but then they want to use this feature in this brand. And so there might be some elements of expansion in the deal term sheet. Then you define the advance. The way the advance is usually calculated is that people will project what they think is the first year's worth of revenue, and they'll take 10% of that. Or they might just use a blanket lump sum. So I've had advances 30,000, 50,000, all the way up to, low mid six figures. Okay, so it can be all over the place. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is this trade-off between advance and royalty rate. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last thing is the royalty rate. And if you're licensing your invention and there's no other licenses involved, like it's not maybe an entertainment property, or let's say if I, like with Spin Master, we had Paw Patrol, which is a huge global preschool brand. If Spin Master wanted to license a feature for its Paw Patrol brand, or maybe one of their licensees, it's a little bit different. Let me back up. I don't want to use the Spin Master example because they own Paw Patrol, but Spin Master licensed Batman from Warner Brothers. So let's just say you've got a feature that would be perfect for a Batman action figure line. Well, they're already paying a license to Warner Brothers for Batman. So, so the sole license is anywhere from usually 4 to 5%. It used to be religiously 5%, and it's degraded a little bit to 4%. So, that's the very clear-cut ballpark range in the toy industry. Okay, and again, unfortunately, I'm not able to really comment with expertise on other industries and how they work. And by the way, other industries don't have as much emphasis on outside invention as the toy industry does. It's unique in that way. It's a very, very, very friendly industry for inventors. With multiple licensors, chances are you're going to be at 2%. And chances are the company that you're licensing it to, they'll want to keep their royalty at maximum 5%, and in unusual circumstances like Polly Pocket, they'll go up to 10%. Now, there's a lot of companies that have the Disney license for Frozen, for Star Wars, for Marvel, big, huge properties. And there's licensees for those properties around the world. Those companies that are licensing that type of, huge, huge property, they're paying 15%, 18% of sales. So you might only get an extra 1%, but you're getting the full value of that property strength to help you maximize your 1 or 2%. So, so the royalty rate, definitely differs in terms of, who else might be involved in the picture. Okay. So those are the basics of a deal term sheet. There might be, something else that might be a warranty clause, like we warrant that and represent that everything we're telling you is true, or that there are no encumbrances of other patents on our invention or something like that. But these are the main things to negotiate in a deal term sheet. Okay. So when it comes time to, actually negotiate the terms, I recommend that you do engage an attorney. It can be expensive, but not having an attorney can be even more expensive. Okay. So there's contract lawyers tend to be a little more affordable. If you have, if you're licensing a brand, you might want an IP, an intellectual property lawyer to license or to negotiate the contract. When I licensed the 2 huge brands to Mattel, we used an IP lawyer. Okay, and it was more expensive, but I will tell you that it was worth it. So in my experience, the big discussion points at the deal term stage, and then it gets baked into the long form, the big trade-off that gets discussed the most is this balance between, big advance or big royalty. And the company is looking to, figure out what's best for them. A lot of times, because they might license something and it may never make it to market, or if it makes it to market, it might not be successful. So a lot of times the company will want to minimize the advance, and then they'll, pay the full royalty. I had a situation with Mattel for the second big invention we licensed to them, where they were under tremendous cost pressure. They had to hit a certain price point for the product that they wanted to launch in order for it to be successful. And they had very little room to maneuver. So what they did was they wanted us to accept a lower royalty rate so that they would have a better shot at pricing this so that it would be successful in the marketplace. So we agreed to talk about a much larger advance in lieu of a lower royalty rate. And again, it's the kind of thing where a smaller percent of something is better than a huge 100% of nothing, right? So that's why that second deal was really big, is because they wanted to front load our benefits in the form of an advance and have a much smaller royalty over the life of the product that they would be launching to help ensure competitive pricing in the marketplace. Another thing I just want to talk about, it's important when you're negotiating a contract and having conversations with your lawyer, and then ultimately, coming together with the licensee, you've got to anticipate what could happen. What could happen? It's hard. No one can really predict the future. So it's hard to know for sure how things are going to go. But you've got to try and think of all the possibilities and try and bake that into language that you put into the contract. So renewal, is it going to be an automatic renewal? And if so, what's the sales hurdle rate that you want to put into the contract to say, if you hit the sales rate, then we can automatically renew? If someone is, has your license and they're like dragging their feet and they're not doing a lot with it, and after 2 years, nothing's happened, and you don't want them to automatically get another 2 years when you haven't gotten anything other than that advance way back when. So, having, a hurdle rate for renewal is very, very important. Extensions, thinking about, where else might they want to use this feature, or how might they grow, the brand, in what areas. In one of my deals with Mattel, we had a contingency that was in the contract that said if Mattel develops entertainment to support, a big entertainment to support this brand, our royalty rate will go down 1%, or maybe two points. I think it went down 2 points, because the added value that Mattel was bringing to the table with this entertainment would warrant a lower royalty rate, because they were doing some heavy lifting in generating real meaningful demand for the brand. So that was something they were anticipating and built it into the contract. Again, there might be people might use the feature in other brands. People might they might get purchased by another company, and you want to make sure that that this survives that that purchase. There's lots of things, and lawyers are really good at helping you anticipate what could happen, and then providing language to protect your interests in a variety of troubleshooting scenarios. So that's one of the really valuable aspects of the role of an attorney in the negotiation. Okay. So I talk about falling out of bed. That means when things just don't happen. So the first thing I want to say is, this is back in 2009. I got the deal term sheet signed with Mattel for this big, huge licensing deal. And then we were going to go to the long form. We did not, so this was in November. We signed the deal sheet. The long form did not get completed until May. It took 6 months to get the long form contract negotiated after we'd already agreed on the deal terms. Well, it came down to the definition of the IP. I had no idea defining the IP would be so difficult, and agreeing to a definition would be so difficult. There were times during that 6 months when I felt like this might not even happen. It was really stressful. So you get a deal term sheet, you still don't have a deal. You don't have a deal until the long form is signed. Okay. And I started between that 6 months, I started, spending my money that I didn't have. So, anyway, we've all been there. I don't know. So the other piece of it, the same deal, we finally got the deal signed in May. And it's like, I can finally relax. I got the big advance, spread it around amongst our collaborators. I kept 30%, and that was great. But the real money comes when you get that royalty revenue stream. And based on how Mattel was thinking about this, they had been working on it at that point. They had been working on this brand by the time we signed the long form for 18 months. 18 months they worked on the brand before the long form was signed. So we were engaged with them on, developing, the brand, although they kind of kept it close to their vest. That this was like they were adding to the IP, and they didn't want us to know what they were doing. So we weren't really well informed. So that was, so in May, I started really spending money from the royalty revenue stream that I hadn't gotten yet. And in July, I got a phone call and I was told that Mattel was not going to pursue marketing the launch, that they presented it to their global sales team, and the global sales team said the pricing was not competitive enough and they couldn't figure out how to get the price competitive enough, and they dropped the product. I was devastated, just devastated. I knew that smaller companies couldn't always get the retailers to buy into a new product. Retailers don't like to take risks. And so I was very cognizant of the fact that smaller companies sometimes can't get a product they license to the market in any meaningful way. But Mattel could do anything it wanted because it was the biggest company in the industry. And I had never anticipated that it would fall out of bed, and it did. And it really, really rocked my world. So you got to be resilient to be in this business, for sure. You got to kind of pick up the pieces and move on. And so later I was at the TAGI Awards, which is a US award program for inventors. And I was telling people about, how this unbelievable thing happened to me with Mattel, that, we had this big deal. It never went to market. It was like inconceivable to me. And I discovered that they all had stories like that. It wasn't uncommon. It wasn't unusual. I thought it was unusual because I just didn't know better, but people have been around the block a few times. They've all had this happen to them. So it's just something, to be aware of, that at any step in the way, things can fall apart. And so it just, it bears acknowledging that you have to exercise emotional restraint. Celebrate that deal, okay? Celebrate getting to market, okay? But until the revenue checks, the royalty checks come in the door, you don't really know. You have no assurances what's going to really happen. I've had several brands launch, and with varying degrees of success. And I learned that I can't predict how successful something's going to be. It's as they say, it's a crapshoot. So those are some stories I wanted to tell, and I wanted to leave like 10 minutes for some Q&A. If anyone in this webinar would like to ask a question, I'm going to ask Celeste, how do you want to facilitate this?
Nancy, I think if we could just put up our hands and ask you a question. I think the others there. Hello, John. I didn't greet you before. So welcome to our webinar after the start and the end. Nancy, I have a question to start off with. You've signed your deal. You've discussed the long form situation. How certain can I be as an inventor, having signed the deal, as it were, that you are going to perform? You meaning the licensee.
The licensee will follow the contract?
Yes. Let's just say that they don't. What recourse do I have?
Okay.
First of all, it should be in the document.
Okay. First of all, let me just give some context. The companies within the toy industry consider the inventor community the lifeblood of innovation. They actively court inventors, and they want to see all the inventions that are out there available to license. and they want to build a reputation for being good to do business with amongst the inventor community. So they're very, in my experience, and I can't speak to other industries, but in my experience in this very inventor-friendly industry called the toy industry, I can't think of a single instance where I've heard someone not complying with a signed contract. And it would be very damaging to the reputation of the company if that were to happen, because it would get talked about. There's what we call co-opetition in the inventor community. It's a combination of cooperation and competition. So I'm competing with other inventors, but I also feel solidarity with other inventors, and we share stories. Obviously, there's things we can't always share. Like I can't, specifically talk about the deal terms I negotiated with Mattel. I can just kind of talk around it, stuff like that. But I think it would be very unusual for someone not to comply with a contract. Having said that, there might be some areas where it's open for interpretation, and there may need to be getting an attorney involved to advocate for you. I do think that deal terms are very much subject to interpretation. And so I have heard that I've heard disgruntled inventors who feel like they got a bait and switch with the deal term, especially if the deal completely falls out of bed between the deal term agreement and the long form contract. And that does happen. But, the only thing I could say about that, Celeste, is if it were to happen, and by the way, let's just keep focused on the long form contract. If it were to happen, you would want to hire an attorney to help advocate for your position, and there will be some negotiation. In terms of it falling out of bed at the deal term sheet phase, you really don't have any recourse because it's usually non-binding. It's just an aid to making sure you're in the right ballpark before you proceed to the long form, but it's usually not binding. There are some letters of agreement, LOA, that specifically would say this is binding, but that's rare. It's rare because people don't want to be bound to something that isn't spelled out in detail. So, so that would be my answer to your question. Is I think it's very rare. I don't know of any instance of someone not complying with a long form contract, and you don't have much recourse if things fall out of bed with the deal term sheet.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have a question? Ken,
yes, Kenneth.
Okay, sure. I love your stories, and what you seem to be remarkably successful. Tell us a little bit about your disappointments, not just the Mattel one, if that's, yeah.
Yeah, that Mattel one really did me in. It took me years to recover because I had so much vested in it. I was living into the future. My whole future was snatched from me. It wasn't a deal that was snatched. It was my whole future. And by the way, what I did is I got complacent and I stopped working my ass off when I knew I was going to have this big revenue stream, and it never materialized. And so I had to scramble to get things back going again to stay solvent as a company. I never achieved my dream of a big sustainable brand in the market. That was what I was aiming for the stars. You know, I had big, like when I left Mattel as an executive, I was thinking about the Cabbage Patch invention story and the Polly Pocket invention story. And I worked closely with both of those inventors to build the business that I had responsibility for. And I said, that's what I want to do. And so I had this really high level of expectation that I never achieved. I had a big deal with Spin Master. My first license was with Spin Master. And oh, by the way, I want to say both with Spin Master and with this other company, this arts and crafts company, we got the deal because they showed it to a retailer. In one case, it was Walmart with Spin Master, and it was Target with the activity company. And Target, you know, those are both huge, you know, mass merchandise, you know, the two of the biggest companies, retailers. The buyers fell in love with it. I gave them permission to present it in advance of having a deal, which is somewhat rare. And the buyers loved them. And so they immediately wanted to lock in a deal. So that happened twice. The Spin Master story, based, you know, like the Walmart buyers saying, this is going to be a top 10 toy. And like, you know, we had stars in our eyes, and I had visions. I already knew how I would be envisioning it having many years, a constant stream of newness, so that it would be in existence for a long time. And it had 2 seasons, 2 decent seasons, you know, nothing to sneeze at. I'm not complaining, but it came to an end. And the deal that Target, you know, that Target helped me get, in the sense that they fell in love with it, they ended up not even taking the brand when it was ultimately created. And we sold it into Toys R Us, but it was really designed to be in a certain section of the store at Target, a very fashiony kind of situation. And it was targeted to older kids, you know, like 8 to 12-year-olds, 8 to 17-year-olds. And then it was in Toys R Us in this itty bitty lifestyle section. It was a terrible, you know, location. It wasn't successful. We got, you know, a pittance of royalty revenue stream off of that, even though we had high hopes for it. Out of the brands, you know, I mentioned I have 6 or so licenses that I was able to come to deals on, but I had probably 2 dozen that I never got a deal on, that I worked on. I remember feeling very frustrated that I would look at product lines that these companies were launching and go, my idea is better than this. Why are they saying no to my idea and they're launching this crap? That was what I was saying to myself. But, you know, so I would say that I found the inventing business to be very difficult. You have to be very resilient. You have to keep on keeping on in the face of lots of rejection. And it's just it's fraught with disappointment. And then, you know, I often liken toy inventing to acting. You know, like you say, oh wow, you know, those actors are so so fantastic. We'll say Tom Cruise, man, I want to be like Tom Cruise. But meanwhile, most of the actors are serving food at the restaurant down the street from where their little apartment is, you know, and that's the toy inventing space. There are some, like, I'm telling you, there are some people that are multi-millionaires, many times over, maybe billionaires for being a toy inventor. And then there's so many people that have to have a income stream separate from royalties because they could never live off their invention business. It's just not sufficient enough. It's not predictable enough. It's not robust enough. So I've been in the trenches. It's not easy. If you're creative and love to create, it's, you know, the lure of success is great.
Nancy, can I just say it must be worth it though? You know, the stress, the rejection, the resilience, it's got to be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of creating something that then gets in, I mean, I still get a royalty check from one of my inventions I licensed in 2011. And I still get a royalty check. It isn't large at this point. You know, it's been 11 years. It's not large, but it makes me happy because it's like I get a check in the mail.
Nancy, can I just go back into your talk? And you were talking about how the definition of IP
Yes.
seemed to have a lot of impact. And that seemed to be part of the Mattel fallout, that people were redefining IP. Can you speak to that just briefly?
Yeah, you know, the IP is what they pay a royalty on. So the company is motivated to define the IP as narrowly as possible. And the inventor is motivated to define the IP as broadly as possible. And so that's where the tension exists. And it's unique in each situation. It's very difficult to put specificity on it that would apply to everything except for that point that I'm making. And so I can't remember the specifics of my story, honestly. It was, 12 years ago. But because we had a brand, and there were unique aspects to the brand, like that could serve as inspiration for something else. We wanted to make sure that all those unique aspects of the brand were included in the IP definition so that if they were inspired by this brand to do something unique, like we didn't want them to take the basic idea and then cancel this brand and start a new brand and not pay a royalty on it. You know what I mean? So it had to do with defining it in a way that we both felt was the meeting of the minds from most narrow to broadest, and then finding that place where we could come to agreement. And that's what I would say about it.
Are you also talking about a patent or a trademark or whatever other aspect of IP there is? Because surely in your general IP that you're licensing out, your name, your trademark,
Celeste, because I'm a branding person, I always named my brands that I was looking to license, and I always initiated trademark protection. I also initiated, I had provisional patents in place for several of the brands. In many industries, you need a patent to get a royalty. In the toy industry, you do not. And in fact, most inventions are not patented. So it really was because we were in the brand space. But I can also see that, you know, if you have this cool feature and you present it in one context, that, you know, the feature could be reinterpreted in a different context. And so trying to put language around that so that, you know, every time it gets reinterpreted in a new way, you still get a royalty. And again, this divide always exists. They want to pay as little as possible. You want them to pay as much as possible. And so in all aspects of how you define what deserves to get royalty paid on, that is what it comes down to. Hey, listen, I'm going to need to leave. Gavin or John, do you guys have any questions before I sign off?
No, I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you for a fantastic talk and a huge wealth of experience. I missed 10 minutes because we had load shedding here. It's a thing called an incompetent government here, where our electricity goes off every day. And it's like just cut off at the worst part, because I was saying, oh, you're in the middle of a story and I wanted to hear the end, and then it just cut out. And oh my God, what happened? So Celeste, I'm going to have to get the recording from you.
Yeah, no,
But,
we've got the recording.
But
Nancy-
yeah, just thank you. I mean, it was just really
Okay.
fantastic. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to watch this recording from the Institute as well. So thank you.
Okay, good.
And thank you
John.
as well. I got on late. The link didn't seem to work on LinkedIn. I had to go to the website, but I was glad that I was able to get in. And yes, certainly appreciate all the information. And I'd love to email you as well and get that boilerplate contract. And
Okay.
I really enjoyed the collaboration part of it. And I feel that's a big part of really where I would, fit in well, as to I can't do it all on my own, obviously.
Yeah. As an entrepreneur, often I would get discouraged because I was just this small entrepreneur without a lot of resources. And I realized I by myself can do so little, but I have access to all these potential partners that enable me to do so much. And that was a key to my success in all aspects of my business, was forging partnerships so that we could succeed together and not be limited by what I could bring to the table.
That's right.
I think
Ken, can I hand over to you to close?
Okay, I will. But I was just going to say, Nancy, I think that it's very informative for us to talk to. I mean, you're a very fascinating presenter, and your stories are so down to earth and practical, and we can feel your emotions as you went through the process. And I think that's wonderful. So from the the four of us listening to you.
And
Cheers.
sorry, can I just say one thing?
Sorry, Gavin. Yeah.
I think just to echo John's point, the LinkedIn link was wrong. It went to some other meeting, I don't know. And it's not the same as the link over here. And there were 54 people who had registered their attendance to the meeting. So I think what obviously happened is those people tried to get in and they couldn't. So I just wanted to ask Nancy, would it be okay if we uploaded this recording to say YouTube, and then we sent that link to the other 54 people that tried to get in and had the wrong link?
I'd be fine with that. I mean, I'm sharing what I know. It's my stories, and I'd be fine with that. So
Great.
yeah, feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to run.
Okay.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
Kenneth, Gavin,
Cheers, everybody.
bye.
Okay. Sure,
Sorry,
I'm going to stop
Celeste?
recording now, I will.
Yeah.